Most people picture the White House as a flawless symbol, white marble, perfect symmetry, a stage where history unfolds with dignity and order. But beneath that polished facade lies a mansion repeatedly broken, burned, flooded, secretly rebuilt, and reshaped by crises no president wanted the nation to see. Hallways sealed after assassinations, rooms stripped to bare steel with the public kept in the dark, foundations hiding radiation tests, wartime bunkers, and the remnants of a near collapse hushed in official reports. This is the story of the house America thinks it knows, and the secrets it has fought for 2 centuries to keep buried. The year is 1792. A new nation barely a decade old decides to build itself a palace, not a throne room, not a castle. But something more dangerous, a symbol of permanence in a country that might not survive the decade. The United States has no money, no established capital, no agreement on where power should even sit. The southern states want it on the Potomac. The northern states see this as a bribe. Alexander Hamilton trades votes for debt assumption. The location is chosen through backroom compromise, not democratic vision. And on this swampy riverbank, they plan to erect a mansion that will convince the world America is here to stay. The architect is James Hoban, an Irish immigrant, a pragmatist. He submits a design borrowed from European nobility: columned porticos, grand reception rooms, sweeping staircases. The commissioners love it. It projects authority the young republic desperately needs. But there's a problem. The budget is a fantasy. Congress allocates funds assuming volunteer labour and cheap materials. The reality becomes something else entirely. The sandstone is too soft. Local quarries can't supply enough quality stone. Workers demand wages the Treasury doesn't have. And the labour force that ultimately builds the walls, the hands that mix the mortar, lay the foundations, carve the columns, is enslaved. The house meant to symbolise freedom is raised by people who have none. By 1800 the structure stands, barely. The exterior walls gleam with fresh whitewash, a coating applied to hide the porous sandstone stains and imperfections. The paint will need constant renewal. Already the house demands maintenance it was never designed to sustain. Inside the reality is harsher. Rooms sit unfinished. Plaster cracks as it dries. The grand staircases wobble. Windows leak cold November air. When John Adams arrives as the first presidential resident, he finds a construction site masquerading as a mansion. His wife Abigail hangs laundry in the unfinished East Room because there's nowhere else to dry it. The house has no running water, no heat in half the rooms, 36 rooms, most of them empty shells. But in public statements, the house is described as magnificent, complete, a triumph. The gap between image and truth begins here. Thomas Jefferson inherits this half-built dream in 1801. He sees potential but also structural flaws. The roof leaks, the floors sag, the foundations settle unevenly into the soft clay soil. Jefferson, an obsessive architect himself, begins making changes. He adds low colonnades, he builds wine cellars, he reconfigures rooms without approval or documentation. He never tells anyone the original design was failing. Instead, he quietly reinforces weak points. He redirects water drainage. He hires craftsmen to shore up load-bearing walls showing stress fractures. The public sees expansion and improvement. The reality is emergency patchwork disguised as refinement. By 1809, the house has consumed more than double its original budget. It still isn't finished, and worse, it's already deteriorating. The sandstone walls absorb moisture during Washington's humid summers, then freeze and crack each winter. The whitewash becomes a necessity, not decoration, applied annually to seal the stone and maintain the illusion of pristine marble. Workers repaint during the night to avoid questions. The house needs constant concealment just to appear unchanged. James Madison takes office in 1809, inheriting these hidden problems. His wife Dolly transforms the house into a social stage, hosting elaborate gatherings that distract from the building's frailties. The Blue Room and Red Room are furnished with European fabrics and gilded furniture. Visitors marvel at the elegance. Behind the walls, workers scramble to replace rotting beams before the next state dinner. Then comes 1812. War with Britain erupts. American forces burn Canadian government buildings in York. The British promise retaliation. By August 1814, British troops march on Washington. The city is barely defended. The government flees. And on August 24th, Soldiers enter the president's house carrying torches. They pile furniture in the center rooms. They pour gunpowder on the floors. They ignite everything that will burn. The sandstone walls survive the inferno. Barely. The intense heat fractures the stone. The wooden interiors are consumed entirely. The roof collapses inward. When rain falls the next day, it pours through the empty shell, soaking the ash-covered ruins. The symbol of American permanence is reduced to a blackened skeleton in a single night. But here's what the public never learns. The damage is far worse than reported. The walls themselves are compromised. The heat has penetrated deep into the sandstone, creating internal cracks that will weaken the structure for decades. The foundations have shifted from the intense temperature change. The house is structurally unsalvageable by 1814 standards. The government faces a choice: admit the loss and build elsewhere, or reconstruct the ruins and pretend nothing essential was destroyed. They choose pretense. James Hoban, the original architect now aged and weary, is hired to rebuild his creation. The public is told this is restoration. The truth is closer to theatrical reconstruction. Hoban must use the damaged walls because admitting they need full replacement would acknowledge total defeat. He builds new interiors inside compromised stone. He hides the worst cracks behind fresh plaster. He salvages what he can and fabricates the rest. By 1817, the house reopens, freshly painted, gleaming white, triumphant in official descriptions, but workers know better. They've built a beautiful cage around structural wounds that will fester for generations. The accelerated timeline demanded by political pressure means shortcuts. Joints that should be reinforced are simply covered. Load distributions that should be recalculated are guessed. The house looks restored. It's actually weaker than before the fire. James Monroe moves in and declares victory over British aggression. The mansion becomes a symbol of American resilience. What no one mentions is the cost. The enslaved labourers who rebuilt it, the compromised materials hidden behind expensive wallpaper, the truth buried in unofficial reports that will surface only when the next crisis forces an honest examination. The dream is fully realised. A gleaming presidential palace standing as proof of national strength. But the house is already living on borrowed time, held together by reputation rather than engineering, appearance rather than integrity. And the men who walk its halls know this. They just don't say it out loud. For the next century, the White House survives through quiet desperation. The public sees state dinners and inaugural balls. They see ambassadors ascending the grand staircase. They see presidents waving from Truman balcony in photographs. What they don't see is the army of workers who arrive before dawn and leave after midnight, fighting a perpetual war against the building's decay. The house is hungry. It devours resources. By the 1850s, the plumbing is primitive and dangerous. Water is still hand-pumped from contaminated wells. The heating system consists of individual fireplaces in each room, 36 separate fires burning simultaneously during winter, filling the house with smoke and creating temperature extremes that warp the woodwork. Servants haul coal up narrow staircases. The walls are perpetually sooted. When running water finally arrives in 1833, the pipes are lead. The water pressure is achieved through gravity tanks in the attic, tanks that leak, causing ceiling damage disguised during routine maintenance. The bathrooms are afterthoughts crammed into converted closets. The house demands modernization but resists it architecturally. Gas lighting is installed in 1848. The fixtures are beautiful, but the infrastructure is a nightmare. Gas lines run through walls never designed for them. Small leaks are common. The smell of gas becomes a familiar background presence. Workers know which rooms to avoid with open flames. Presidents and their families sleep in bedrooms where explosive vapors occasionally accumulate overnight. No one publicly acknowledges the danger. By 1865, the House witnesses Abraham Lincoln's assassination. But before John Wilkes Booth's bullet, Lincoln was already obsessed with the building's physical deterioration. He walked the halls at night during the Civil War, insomniac and haunted, listening to the structure creak under its own weight. He heard floors groan. He noticed plaster falling from ceilings. He saw cracks in the East Room widening yearly. He mentioned these observations to no one but his closest staff. After Lincoln's death, the house absorbs new trauma. The room where he died is stripped and redecorated, but the building itself remembers, absorbing grief into its walls the way it absorbed fire in 1814. The house becomes a repository of secret histories. stains scrubbed from floorboards, bullet holes concealed behind picture frames, bloodstains sealed beneath new carpets. The physical structure becomes a keeper of things too terrible to display. Theodore Roosevelt arrives in 1901 with characteristic energy and immediately declares the house inadequate. His family is large, the building is crowded, living quarters and official spaces are confused. He orders expansion. The West Wing is constructed in 1902, not primarily for convenience, but because the original house can't structurally support the weight of modern government. The floor joists in the main building are already weakening. Adding more offices would trigger collapse, so they build outward, creating satellite structures that let the core building breathe. The public narrative is about progress and growth. The engineering reality is about offloading stress from a failing frame. Underground, workers begin excavating for new mechanical systems. The house has no central heating, no electrical infrastructure, no modern ventilation. Installing these requires tunneling beneath the foundations, an operation conducted in secrecy because admitting the scope of work would reveal how primitive the house actually is. They encounter the original 1792 foundations. The stones are crumbling. The mortar has turned to powder in places. The basement walls show water damage from a century of flooding. The house is literally sinking into the Potomac floodplain, settling unevenly, creating the structural stresses Lincoln noticed decades before. Workers shore up the foundations with steel and concrete. They don't replace them. That would require evacuating the house and admitting failure. Instead, they create a hidden exoskeleton, modern supports disguised behind original stonework. The house becomes a hybrid, 18th century appearance concealing 20th century emergency reinforcement. The electrical system installed in 1891 is already obsolete by 1910. Wiring was threaded through the walls like an afterthought, with no consideration for load capacity or safety. Outlets are rare. Extension cords snake through hallways. The system shorts regularly, causing small fires that are quickly extinguished and never reported publicly. By the 1920s, the house has become a fire trap wrapped in beautiful textiles. The roof, rebuilt after the 1814 fire, is failing again. The timber frame is riddled with rot. During heavy snow, staff genuinely fear collapse. Engineers assess the situation and recommend full replacement. President Coolidge authorizes the work but insists it be done during congressional recess, when fewer people are watching. Workers remove the roof in sections, exposing the house's interior to weather during construction. Rain damages ceilings in the private quarters. The work takes longer than planned. When Congress returns, the project is only half finished. Coolidge simply lies, saying the work is routine maintenance. The pattern is entrenched. Major structural problems addressed through secret emergency measures, while public statements minimize the truth. The house's appetite grows with each decade. By the 1930s, it requires round-the-clock staffing just to function. Boilers need constant monitoring. The electrical system requires dedicated engineers. Plumbing fails monthly. The heating breaks down midwinter, forcing temporary evacuations disguised as diplomatic trips. Franklin Roosevelt arrives in 1933 to find a building consuming enormous resources simply to maintain basic habitability. Roosevelt has his own needs. Wheelchair-bound, he requires ramps and elevators the house doesn't have. These are installed covertly. The public never sees images of the president in his wheelchair, and the house is retrofitted to hide his disability. Secret passages are created. Service elevators are disguised. The house becomes an accomplice in maintaining presidential image. Then comes World War II. Roosevelt needs a war room. He needs secure communications. He needs to project strength while coordinating a global conflict from a building that's functionally a fragile antique. The solution is to build down. Workers excavate beneath the East Wing, creating bunkers and command centers hidden below ground. The work happens at night. Materials are delivered through unmarked trucks. Workers sign secrecy agreements. Above ground, tourists still take White House tours, unaware that beneath their feet, workers are pouring concrete for fortified spaces designed to survive bombing raids. The house grows a hidden anatomy. Tunnels connecting to the Treasury building, escape routes to nearby shelters, reinforced rooms for storing classified documents. These additions are never announced. Blueprints are classified. Even decades later, the full extent of wartime construction remains partially secret. By 1945, the house is a contradiction. Its public image is a pristine 18th century mansion. Its physical reality is a patchwork of hidden systems, emergency reinforcements, and structural compromises spanning 150 years. The gap between what Americans see and what exists has become a canyon. And then, in 1948, the house's appetite for secrecy finally meets its limit. The structure that has been quietly failing for decades reaches a breaking point. It begins with a piano. President Truman's daughter, Margaret, is practicing in the second-floor music room. The piano sits near the centre of the space, a Steinway grand weighing roughly 750 pounds. She's playing when the floor begins to move, not a subtle creak. The entire room sways. The piano shifts. Margaret stops playing and looks down. The floor is visibly bowing beneath the weight. She leaves the room immediately and tells her father. Truman, a former haberdasher with common sense and no tolerance for political theatre, calls for engineers, not decorators, not historical preservationists, engineers. They arrive within hours. What they find is catastrophic. The second-floor joists, the massive wooden beams supporting the residential quarters, are failing. Not just old, failing. Some are split completely through. Others sag several inches below their original position. The floors have been slowly sinking for years, unnoticed because the deflection was gradual. But gradual doesn't mean safe. It means the failure has been progressive, systemic, and is now critical. The engineers expand their inspection. They examine the staterooms on the first floor, they check the basement, they test load-bearing walls. Everywhere they look, they find the same story. Structural elements pushed far beyond safe limits, held in place by inertia and luck rather than integrity. In the East Room, the largest and most ceremonial space in the house, the ceiling is supported by beams that are cracked through more than half their depth. The massive chandeliers hanging from that ceiling weigh hundreds of pounds each. If the beams fail, the chandeliers fall. If the floor above gives way, the room becomes a tomb. The engineers deliver their conclusion in writing. The house is unsafe for occupancy. Truman reads the report. He has two choices. He can quietly make cosmetic repairs, smile for cameras, and hope nothing collapses during his term. Or he can acknowledge the truth and force a reckoning that will cost millions, create political ammunition for opponents, and potentially destroy the building completely in an attempt to save it. He chooses the truth. But even Truman doesn't tell the whole truth publicly. The official statement describes necessary renovations and modernization. The press is told the president is moving across the street to Blair House for convenience during construction. The full scope of the structural failure is classified to avoid national embarrassment. Only in internal documents does the real language appear: imminent danger of collapse. In November 1948, the first family vacates the White House. They take only personal belongings. Everything else, furniture, artwork, historical artifacts, stays inside while engineers assess what can be saved. The answer is almost nothing. The house's interior must be completely removed. This isn't renovation, it's evisceration. Every wall, every floor, every ceiling above the ground floor must come out. The structure will be stripped to its exterior stone shell and rebuilt from within using modern materials and engineering standards. The project's scale is staggering. Workers document and number every piece of historical woodwork, planning to reinstall it after the new structure is complete. Crown moulding from the 1817 reconstruction, mantelpieces from the Lincoln era, floorboards walked on by a century of presidents. All of it is carefully removed, crated and stored, but much of it won't survive the process. Wood pieces crack during removal, plaster ornaments crumble. The documentation itself becomes confused as thousands of items are catalogued. Some pieces are lost, others are damaged beyond restoration. The house is being saved by destroying it. By early 1949, workers have erected scaffolding throughout the interior. The familiar rooms, East Room, State Dining Room, Blue Room, Red Room, are stripped to bare walls. The grand staircase is dismantled. The second-floor residential quarters are reduced to empty space. Photographers are allowed in briefly to document the shocking transformation. The images show a hollow shell. The iconic exterior walls still stand, white and pristine from outside, but inside it's an industrial cavity. Steel beams are installed to carry the new floors. Concrete is poured for modern foundations within the old basement. The house becomes a construction site within a museum facade. The workers discover worse problems as they dig deeper. The original 1792 foundations are even weaker than suspected. In some places, they've shifted feet from their original position. The basement walls show signs of catastrophic water infiltration over decades. The old sewer systems have leaked into the foundation soil, creating voids beneath load-bearing walls. If the reconstruction hadn't happened, the house would have suffered a major structural failure within years, possibly months. Engineering solutions require modern materials. Steel I-beams replace wooden joists. Concrete replaces timber frames. A new basement is excavated deeper than the original, creating space for modern mechanical systems. Air conditioning, advanced electrical systems, fire suppression, all the infrastructure a mid-20th century government building requires, is installed in the new subterranean levels. The house grows downward while maintaining its historical footprint, but as the work progresses, costs spiral. The original budget estimate of $5.4 million quickly proves inadequate. Unexpected problems appear daily: hidden rot, structural deficiencies, material shortages in post-war America. By 1950, costs have exceeded $5.7 million, more than $70 million in today's currency. Congress demands explanations. Truman faces criticism for spending millions on a house, while Americans struggle with post-war economic adjustment. Opponents call it wasteful, unnecessary, a presidential vanity project. Truman stands firm, and the house, he argues, is not his home. It's the nation's home. Letting it collapse would be a global humiliation. The work continues. Compromises are necessary. Some historical elements deemed too expensive to restore are replaced with replicas. Certain architectural details are simplified. Period-accurate materials are substituted with modern equivalents that look similar but lack historical authenticity. The house being rebuilt is not the house being saved. By 1951, the new interior structure is complete. Workers begin reinstalling the historical elements they removed years before, but the house they're decorating is fundamentally different. The walls may look original, but behind them is steel and concrete. The floors may mimic historical wood, but beneath them is modern structural engineering. The White House becomes a stage set built around a 20th century skeleton. Truman moves back in during March 1952, his final year in office. The house looks much as it did in 1948. The East Room is elegant, the State Dining Room is grand, the Blue Room gleams. But Truman knows what few others do. Almost nothing visible is original. The house is a carefully constructed illusion of itself, and he's forbidden from telling anyone. The project details are classified. Future presidents will host dignitaries in rooms they believe are historically authentic, unaware they're standing in elaborate recreations. Tourists will admire original mouldings that are actually plaster casts made in 1950. The house maintains its myth by concealing its recent trauma. The crisis is resolved by erasure. But what survives this ordeal? What, if anything, remains of the original vision? The White House that emerges from the Truman reconstruction is stronger, safer, more functional. It's also less authentic than it has ever been. Only the exterior sandstone walls, the shell scorched in 1814 and patched repeatedly since, can claim direct continuity to 1792. Everything else is reproduction, replacement, or modern fabrication, disguised as historical preservation. The house has become what it always threatened to become, a symbol protected at the cost of substance. But the appetite for secrecy doesn't end in 1952. It deepens. The Cold War arrives, bringing new fears and new demands. President Eisenhower orders construction of emergency bunkers beneath the house, spaces designed to protect leadership during nuclear attack. Workers excavate further into the earth, creating reinforced rooms that can be sealed against radiation and connected to government continuity networks. These spaces are never discussed publicly. Their existence is classified. Even their construction involves workers cleared at the highest security levels, building underground facilities beneath one of America's most visible landmarks, while tourists walk above them daily. The house grows another hidden layer, survival infrastructure buried so deep it may outlast the structure above it. President Kennedy inherits a building whose public face matches tourists' expectations, while its interior reality becomes increasingly militarized. Communications equipment fills hidden rooms. Security systems monitor every entrance. The house sprouts electronic sensors, cameras, and detection equipment disguised as architectural features. Kennedy privately complains about the building's condition. Despite the massive reconstruction, problems persist. The roof still leaks. The climate control fails during state dinners. The electrical system, though improved, can't handle the demands of modern technology. The house is never finished demanding repairs. It's a monster that feeds perpetually. The 1960s and 70s bring social upheaval, protests, and security concerns that transform the building's relationship to its surroundings. The house, originally designed with open grounds and accessible entrances, becomes a fortress. Barriers appear on Pennsylvania Avenue, guard posts proliferate, public access shrinks. The building, meant to symbolize democratic accessibility, becomes increasingly isolated from the people it represents. By the 1980s, the house harbors layers of history like geological strata. In the sub-basement, Cold War bunkers and communications equipment. In the basement, mechanical systems from the 1950s. On the ground floor, rooms that look 19th century but were built in the 1950s. On the second floor, living quarters repeatedly renovated containing almost nothing from before 1950. In the attic, modern climate control equipment. And scattered throughout, fragments of the original structure preserved like relics. A mantelpiece here, a doorframe there, pieces of wood that actually witnessed Lincoln and Jefferson, and the mansion's first uncertain years. The house is a palimpsest. Each generation writes over the previous, never quite erasing what came before, never quite preserving it either. Then comes September 11th, 2001. The terrorist attacks trigger another wave of fortification. The Secret Service demands enhanced barriers, blast protection, and secure rooms capable of withstanding modern threats. Construction begins, much of it classified, on hardening the house against dangers the original builders never imagined. More rooms are sealed, more tunnels are dug, more monitoring systems are installed. The house's hidden anatomy expands again, this time focused on protection against threats both external and internal. When tours resume after 9/11, visitors see the same elegant staterooms. They don't see the reinforced walls, the advanced monitoring systems, the secure communications rooms, the emergency protocols embedded in every doorway. The gap between appearance and reality has never been wider. Today, historians estimate that less than 40% of the visible woodwork and architectural detail predates 1950. Much of what tourists photograph as original was crafted in workshops during the Truman Reconstruction. The house is authentic in spirit, approximate in fact. But here's the deeper truth. The White House has always been this way. From the moment enslaved workers laid its first foundations in 1792, the gap between symbol and reality was the house's defining characteristic. It was never the pristine temple Americans imagined. It was always the desperate effort to make the symbol survive another year, another crisis, another century. The house endures not because it's unchanging, but because every generation agrees to the same bargain: maintain the image, hide the cost, and pass the burden forward. Presidents have lived with floors they knew were unsafe. They've hosted foreign dignitaries in rooms they knew were structurally unsound. They've smiled for photographers in buildings they knew were failing, trusting that the failure wouldn't happen during their watch. And when failure came, in 1814, in 1948, in smaller crises every decade between, the solution was always the same: fix it in secret, maintain the façade, let the next generation inherit both the house and its carefully guarded mythology. The cost of this bargain is enormous and invisible. Historical authenticity sacrificed for structural necessity, transparency traded for national dignity, truth buried beneath layers of plaster and paint and official silence. Workers died building the original house, enslaved labourers whose names weren't recorded, immigrant craftsmen whose contributions were minimised. Workers died in the 1814 Reconstruction, accidents unreported, injuries uncompensated. Workers were injured during the Truman Reconstruction, falls, equipment failures, incidents classified or forgotten. The house consumes human effort like fuel. It always has. It still does. Every time a president takes office, they inherit a building that demands constant sacrifice: money, labour, transparency, and occasionally lives. They also inherit the responsibility to maintain the illusion, to stand in the Blue Room and speak of history and continuity while knowing that nearly everything around them is reproduction. Some presidents have pushed for greater transparency. Some have wanted to tell the truth about the building's real history, but the institutional pressure to protect the symbol always wins. The White House staff, the Secret Service, the historical preservationists, everyone invested in the house's maintenance has a stake in preserving its mythology. Because if Americans knew the full truth, if they understood that their most sacred civic symbol was repeatedly built by enslaved people, reconstructed after catastrophic failures, gutted and rebuilt within living memory, and is currently more fortress than museum, would they feel differently about what it represents? The house exists in a permanent state of becoming. It's never finished, never stable, never truly the thing it pretends to be. It's always in some state of failure or repair or enhancement or concealment, and yet it stands. The white walls gleam each morning. The flag flies. Presidents emerge to greet visitors. The house performs its role flawlessly, hiding 2 centuries of trauma behind a facade maintained by thousands of people who understand that the symbol matters more than the truth. This is the house's real legacy, proof that symbols survive not through strength, but through collective agreement to believe in them despite evidence. The White House teaches us that nations, like buildings, endure through constant reinvention, disguised as preservation. That what we choose to remember matters more than what actually happened. That the cost of maintaining faith in an ideal is often the truth about its foundation. 233 years after its construction began, the White House remains the most recognized symbol of American democracy. It's also one of the most successful exercises in sustained illusion in architectural history. The house has won its survival by becoming what it needed to become, a beautiful lie that America decided was worth preserving. And in that truth, in the gap between what we see and what exists, lies something both disturbing and oddly hopeful. Because if a building this broken, this repeatedly destroyed and reconstructed and concealed, can still stand as a symbol of national strength, then perhaps survival itself requires embracing the contradiction. Perhaps endurance isn't about being unbreakable. It's about being willing to break, to rebuild, to hide the scars, and to continue anyway. The White House has done this for over 2 centuries. It will likely continue for centuries more, not because it's strong, but because we've agreed it must appear strong. Not because it's authentic, but because we need it to represent authenticity. The house survives because we've decided the symbol is worth more than the truth, and every president who enters those doors accepts this bargain, knowing that maintaining the illusion is part of the job, perhaps the most important part. The foundation may be compromised, the structure may be mostly reproduction, the history may be half fiction, but the flag still flies, the walls still gleam white, and the house still stands as proof that sometimes the most powerful truths are the ones we choose not to tell. The White House isn't alone in carrying these contradictions. Across America and around the world, estates and landmarks harbour similar gaps between image and reality. Histories concealed, labour hidden, costs buried beneath beautiful surfaces. If you found this story compelling, let me know in the comments which estate or historical building you'd like explored next. What other symbols might be hiding truths we've never questioned? Hit the like button if this changed how you see the White House. Subscribe for more stories that look beneath the surface of history's most carefully maintained facades. Because the buildings we preserve tell us as much about who we are as they do about who we were. And sometimes the most revealing thing about a symbol is what we've decided it shouldn't say.